Thank you for joining us again for our February Connection Corner. Jody is not going to be with us this afternoon, so I'm going to take her place for now. We usually start our meetings by sharing the values excuse me, that we adhere to, being people-focused, considering equity, holding folks accountable, looking for partnerships, and trying to be innovative is all part of what Department of Family Services is all about. We also like to share group norms when we're doing these presentations. We ask that folks be present and prepared, that everyone contribute, that we respect confidentiality, that we have our cameras on when we're speaking. If you feel comfortable with that, you can leave them on all the time is fine as well, and to mute when not talking. So today's goal is to talk about maintaining boundaries when working with clients. And I'm wondering what comes to mind when you hear this statement.
Can I raise a quick question?
Yes.
First, I'd like to know, in this specific context, how you define the boundaries. You mean physical boundaries or mental boundaries or things like that?
Okay. I think there's an aspect of all of that to the work that our volunteers do with our clients. So we'll talk about that through the presentation. If you feel like you're not getting the answers that you're looking for, let us know and we'll continue to explore that with you.
All right.
So we're talking about the role, which is the specifics of your responsibilities as a volunteer. And then we're also talking about the scope, which is the parameters in which you operate. And we're going to talk about both of those. So why do we need boundaries? They are set for client and volunteer safety and protection. They are set to uphold risk management guidelines and other county policies that we're obligated to follow and interested in following. They are set to mitigate risk to and for clients and volunteers, to manage volunteer and client expectations, and ultimately to provide guidance for volunteers about how to carry out their roles. So we don't want to assume that any volunteers know already what their roles and responsibilities are, because that's when things go awry. It's a good idea to review our handbook periodically as a refresher for your specific task and general guidelines for all volunteers. You can let us know if you need a copy, if you don't have one. If you've been with us a long time, you may have actually gotten a paper copy, or we may have sent it out to you before or after our orientations. When we update it, we usually do send that to our active volunteers for review. So it's a good document to keep nearby. We say during orientation, we don't go over every single thing that's in it, so we do ask that you review that and then let us know if you have questions. These are the guidelines that we share during orientation that are set by risk management. And so you may transport clients as part of your service to clients, but these guidelines were set out so that both you and the clients have a safe and enjoyable experience. Yes, you can push people in wheelchairs. Yes, you can carry or load assistive devices up to 20 pounds. That might include a rollator, a walker, a portable oxygen tank. We do not provide any hands-on service as workers, and we do not expect our volunteers or want our volunteers to do that. That could include lifting or transferring of clients, or even holding their hands and helping to steady them as they're getting out and about. We want our clients to be independent. With very few exceptions, we don't provide supervision to clients. One exception would be through the ElderLink Respite Care Program, and then you receive some specific training about that. But that's not our goal for most of our volunteer opportunities. And then we ask you not to transport clients having a procedure involving any kind of anesthesia. If you've ever done that, you may have signed off on something that says, you would keep an eye on them for 24 to 48 hours. And that's not something that we do in our volunteer roles. A lot of our guidelines and expectations are laid out in our confidentiality standards and code of ethics. These are documents that you read and signed off on when you first applied with Volunteer Solutions. In most instances, again, unless you're really been around for many, many, many years, these are documents that are provided for in the appendix of our handbook, and so those are regularly available to review as well. When I do orientation, I usually read these verbatim because I don't want to miss anything. But essentially keeping information confidential, knowing that you might be subject to warnings or dismissal for breach of that conduct, no social media posts, being sensitive to the information that you're hearing volunteers share with you, clients share with you, not sharing specifics of a client's name or situation, not talking to media. We would refer any media inquiries to our public information officers, so we wouldn't want volunteers to speak to the media about their work with us. And then being aware of concerns about information or confidentiality or all of that. Again, remembering that we don't want to terminate anybody or dismiss anyone or have anyone be personally liable for anything that they're doing while interacting with our clients. Most of the time when we're discussing client information, we're going to do so over the phone or through what's considered a secure email. Sometimes there's issues with opening that, but generally there aren't. And we can certainly relay information by phone when needed. So that's pretty much it for confidentiality. Code of ethics, how we're interacting with each other, with clients, with county staff, that we're not discriminating on the basis of any of those key definers like age, race, ethnicity, color, gender, sexual orientation, physical disability, mental impairments, religion, or political ideology. We know that there's a lot of differences in our world today, and we want to honor those. One of our big things under Code of Ethics is to provide all services as a volunteer and not accept money or gifts or their family members, and not use your own money to purchase items. One thing that I say to volunteers as I'm training them is, if you occasionally pick up an item for a client and then the next volunteer isn't able to, then that sets that client up for inconsistencies in the services we provide. So we are not to spend our own money to serve our clients. And they would talk with their workers about needs that they have anyway, so we can always refer them back to their workers. Again, there's lots of things in the handbook. Certainly, we want our volunteers to follow the drug-free policy of the county, be aware of things that might have an effect on the clients or the county, and ultimately conduct yourself in good faith, ensuring you don't commit physical, psychological, or emotional or financial harm to clients. Something we've added in the last few years is the Adult Protective Services Mandated Reporter Training. That's available online. It's a state training. It's very good. It's not a long, involved training, but it does give good information about when you might call Adult Protective Services. We'll talk some more about that as we go through. And these things, again, are the appendixes in your handbook. So, setting boundaries. I think it starts with being clear and direct. both what your needs are and what your availability is, and hearing what the client's needs are. You can recommend help from other sources. You would learn about those other sources most often through things like our Connection Corner, or through discussions you'd have with your regional volunteer coordinator or other staff if for some reason they're not available. I mentioned just a minute ago that our clients almost all have a caseworker that is their primary contact. And so when somebody brings something up that's new that you hadn't heard about or different than those things you've agreed to do, you can always say, have you talked with your caseworker about that? Sometimes they don't remember who their caseworker is, and you can let us know that, and we certainly can make that connection. Another way to respond would be, let me check on that. Again, reach out to us, let us know the concern. We may share information that you can share back with them, or we may call them directly, or we may refer them to their caseworker. And the regional volunteer coordinators, again, are Christy, Jody, and myself. And the areas that we serve and the clients that we help coordinate with are defined by the zip codes in which they live. And the same thing with the volunteers, depending on what your zip code is, that determines what regional volunteer coordinator would be your primary contact, but you can contact any of our staff at any time if you can't reach us. And there's a map that defines that. That's also in the handbook. So Jody mentioned that this boundary is particularly key for her. We are not volunteers, volunteers are not the same people that provide housekeeping and laundry. We're not a cleaning service. Volunteers are not permitted to take and use clients' SNAP, debit, or credit cards. And so she said that she had a client who didn't maintain the boundary of not giving a volunteer the SNAP, debit, or credit card. And when the volunteer took a client's credit card to go shopping, the client then accused them of misusing it. Christy, do you have any stories that you would like to share? Examples?
I don't have any stories, but I would say that one boundary that I've come up against recently is a volunteer being asked to walk somebody's dog. We don't do that. And I've also recently had a client ask a volunteer to take them to a colonoscopy, and we don't do that as well. So.
Great examples. All right. So here's a couple case studies. And in the case studies, the questions are, what risks exist for both the client and the volunteer? And how would you advise the volunteer to handle the scenario? So we've got a volunteer assisting an 80-year-old female, Miss J, twice a month with grocery shopping. She and the volunteer get along well and end up talking quite a bit. Periodically, she asks the volunteer to help with other issues, talking to her daughter, doing home improvement tasks, understanding her bank statements, etc. So in this scenario, can you identify any risks that exist for both the client and the volunteer? And what would you recommend the volunteer do? Please feel free to unmute and add anything you'd like to. No comments. So I guess the way I would address this, the first thing that comes to mind is that when we assign a volunteer to a client, they're assigned for a specific task. So this volunteer is helping Mrs. J twice a month with grocery shopping. When Mrs. J says I really could use help with these other things, I would go back to the comments from the previous slides that said, have you talked to your worker about that? Because that would be the best place for the client to get some answers about other needs. One of the reasons we want them to talk to their primary caseworker is because they're very knowledgeable about all the services that are out in the community that the client may or may not be eligible for. So where even the regional volunteer coordinators could say, well, you could call Rebuilding Together about home improvements. Maybe the case manager knows that the client's in a rental unit and not their own home, and so Rebuilding Together couldn't help them. We often, as regional volunteer coordinators who have been here a long time, Christy the longest, Jody next, and then me, are familiar with some resources, but most often we're going to refer the client, just as you could, to their primary worker because they're going to know what services might be available. One of the things that we say in orientation is that we don't help with financial matters. There is a program we partner with, it's Elderling. You may remember hearing in orientation that they are part of Inova Health Systems, and they do serve a lot of folks with a program called money management. So they go out, they help them review bank statements, they help them possibly pay bills or look at setting up budgets and making sure that, you know, important things are getting paid on a regular basis. So talking to her daughter, that's a good scenario. Maybe it means that some family counseling would be appropriate. Maybe it's the daughter's the caregiver, and so the daughter could benefit from some of our caregiver resources that we have available to family. Most often in orientation, we say the primary role when hearing concerns from clients is to listen with silent empathy. Again, refer them to their caseworker, call us and let us know what issues are being expressed so that we can relay that information. Any other thoughts about this case study?
I would just say that it does get tricky, but if you have questions, just ask us and we can explore it further with, other resources. Because it's a fine line, and if you're just asking for one little thing and it's one time, but if it's all the time, then it could be a deeper need. So
Can I ask a quick question? So we as volunteers fully understand when there are anything unclear, we need to turn to our volunteer coordinator for assistance or clarification. Um, do our, do our clients are well aware of the situation as well? Or
So,
they might feel we are not so professional or responsible and like.
so in orientation, we say to the volunteers, we say, be sure and wear your badge. And that will identify you as someone who's gone through our training. That doesn't mean that you're capable of meeting all their needs. I don't think anyone is capable of meeting everyone's needs. When we get a referral, so the way that we learn about client needs is that a worker will send a referral to our intake specialist, Carol. She will review it. She will make sure, for example, the person's able to ambulate on their own. They may need mechanical assistance through a walker or that kind of thing, but they should not need a hand to steady them, for example. And so we should be screening out things that aren't appropriate for our volunteers. We get that referral. We, as regional volunteer coordinators, call the client and say, hey, your worker has suggested you could use some help with grocery shopping. So what we're going to do is put out that request in our weekly email. When we have a volunteer who's interested, we'll let you know. We then talk with the volunteer and share as much as we know about the client's situation or much as a is as appropriate to share. Sorry, my words aren't coming clear. And then we make sure to connect the volunteer and the client. We share with the client when I share with the client when I'm getting that information. Grocery shopping is typically every other week or twice a month. We're not your personal taxi service. I don't say it in those words, but essentially these are the things I'm going to relay. We won't be taking you to 4 or 5 different stores. I recently had a client who wants to go to 4 different stores. Well, he goes twice a month. So one time a month, the volunteer will take him to 2 stores, and then one time a month, they'll take him to another, just because we also want to protect our volunteers and what we set them up for. So we do relay information to clients. Bigger question is probably how much do they hear? How much do they remember? And part of that is our job as coordinators to then check in with volunteers and check in with clients to be sure that the relationship is a good match, that things are going smoothly. Anytime you have questions, let us know. I really appreciate when my volunteers send me an update once or twice a month and say, hey, I've taken Jane out 3 times this month. Everything went well. Nothing new came up in discussion, whatever the case may be. So do they understand? Do they hear? We hope so. We have a lot of folks that have some level of dementia or very overwhelmed with life in general. So we rely on our volunteers to reiterate to the clients what it is they can and can't do. And that's part of that, setting boundaries. And we realize that's hard, especially if they're saying, but I don't have anybody else to help me. That's when they need to go back to their worker so the worker can identify other resources that might be available. I see you shaking your head, so I hope that answers.
Thank you so much for the clarification.
Absolutely. All right, so another case study. A VS volunteer chats with Mr. W once a week via phone. He mentions during the conversation he hasn't been feeling well lately. He adds he hasn't been able to afford his medications. Comments about risks for the client or the volunteer and how you might handle that.
So could I answer this, especially during the conversation where Mr. W mentioned that he hadn't been feeling well lately? I may raise some follow-up questions like, have you talked to your internal physician or your worker regarding your I would say your well-being? And as for the topic of afford could not afford his medications, um, I think I will as well immediately report to my coordinator regarding Mr. W's financial situation.
Perfect. When Jody got the slide thing together, I thought maybe we should include a couple cases where we might even call Adult Protective Services. And I think this is one of those. So you call us, this is something that he's vocalized he's not feeling well, hasn't been able to take his meds. I would listen to your concerns and then suggest that we call Adult Protective Services hotline and say, hey, we really need someone to explore this because this is more than something we would just kind of set aside or email a worker and, give them a lot of time to follow up on. So this may be a case to call Adult Protective Services. Again, I know a lot of people have concerns about calling, but unlike Child Protective Services, they're not going to remove an adult from a situation in most instances. I mean, adults have the right to make choices, good, bad, or indifferent, but we're certainly going to want to address medical issues, especially if it's something where if he's not missing his meds, that could be a danger to him. So we want to match him with resources. I hope that makes sense. All right, another last case study. A VS volunteer picks up Mrs. S for their twice monthly errand run. In the car, the client mentions she needs to send money through Western Union to a foreign contact. Definitely another APS one. I'll go ahead and say that. One thing we talked about in our last Connection Corner meeting was Silver Shield and scams that are out there. Lots of things happening. I believe it was mentioned that there are about 80 current scams that they're following. Yes, Emily is shaking her head. That's a lot of scams. That's a lot of stuff happening. One of them might be sending money through Western Union to a foreign contact. I think I heard just last week that nutrition was working with someone who had just sent thousands and thousands of dollars to somebody. It was a romance scam. And so there are lots of things out there.
And Janine and Tanya put this in the chat, but one of the connections that these clients have is their caseworker, and as well as us as the volunteer coordinators. And so I think the volunteers in a situation like this could contact us and let us know, and we can contact the worker to let them know that this is happening, but probably not doing this task would definitely be something that you wouldn't want to follow through on in that ride that this person is receiving. So just wanted to mention that because we do have a very close relationship with the workers, and those workers really, as we talked about earlier, have a good understanding of a broader awareness of the client and the context of what's going on with them.
Right. So speaking from your experience, have you encountered boundary issues when volunteering? If so, what kind and what happened? And how did you manage this situation? Would anybody like to share? Well, let's take a minute and go through questions that were offered to us. And if you think of something you want to share that, please let us know. Feel free to unmute and share that. So one of our volunteers said, giving and accepting gifts, including money, what do they do about that? What do clients understand our role is so that we can better know how to say no? And when should we report something? I think we've touched on all of those things. Again, it's good for our volunteers to help us back up the expectations of the program. Hopefully we made those very clear either in orientation, in our individual discussions with you about an assignment, or in the handbook. I know that's hard to say no to gifts or money. We also, as staff, do not accept gifts or money, and we're very clear with our volunteers what our guidelines are. And so I think, again, being very clear with the client, we really appreciate your offer. I really appreciate your offer. As a volunteer, I'm not able to accept any of that. If this is something you want to donate, I'd be glad to drop it off at a Goodwill or a nonprofit in your name, but I do this because I'm a volunteer, and that's not acceptable. So thank you. How are healthy boundaries with clients defined? I think we've talked well about that, but if again you have any specific questions, let us know. How to be effective and respectful when navigating challenges and saying no. No, thank you. That's kind. I appreciate that. Seems like that has a lot of meaning to you. Can we think of someone else who might benefit from receiving this? All of those, I think, are good questions. And again, sharing, we're volunteer. We really are not able to accept or expect anything for our services. Best way to manage client expectations, I think, follow the guidelines. Tell them that you've been given guidelines, you're following them. Um, Something else just came to me and I missed that. Being clear, being consistently clear, even though that's hard. Um, Anyone else on staff or any of the volunteers have other suggestions for that? Best way to
I will.
manage. Go ahead.
I will share one more. Actually, the volunteer is no longer volunteering, but not because of this. He just it's time for him to retire. But he worked a very long time with someone with anxiety, and they were very close, and they had a long-term relationship. And the client was not feeling well one day, and he called the volunteer and asked him to take him to the hospital. And the volunteer did the exact right thing and said, "No, you need to call 911, and you need to call your social worker." So even though they had that close relationship and he could have done it, he did the exact right thing. So if you have a hard time saying no, just say the policy is, and I'm following policy.
Very good. Valerie said, how do I fight my nice guy approach? You can still be a nice guy or a nice gal or whatever. But like Christy said, consistency, firm yeses and nos. We're following policy. If they have concerns, they're welcome to call us as well and talk with us about any of their concerns. Diane asked, how do I keep from getting too close emotionally and wanting to help beyond the volunteer role? Clients sometimes even ask for things inappropriate, not really realizing it. Where does our help have to stop? I also have a longtime volunteer, Christy's making me remember this, who had visited someone for years and they ended up leaving their home and going into a long-term care facility, and the volunteer wanted to maintain contact with them. And so we were very clear with the volunteer, and they understood that once the client left their home, they were no longer one of our clients. And so our insurance no longer covered their services, um, liability, any of that. And they knew that any relationship they had with the client going forward was something they were doing as an individual. They were very clear on that. It's hard when you've worked with somebody that you connect with or that you feel accountable to on some level and that you emotionally attach with. I mean, we can all do things kind of in a mechanical way and just, show up and take them places, but we're all people. We all have those emotions and we all have those feelings and we all have interactions with clients. And in the best interactions and the connections, we do get close to them. So maintaining some boundaries, both for your sake and for the volunteer's sake. I mean, we all have instances where things come up that we have to change plans, and we don't want that to be harmful to you. We don't want that to be harmful to our clients. Um, we work with an aging population, and sometimes our clients unexpectedly pass. And then how do we deal with that? Certainly, we want to be there as a resource for you. We want to appropriately share any changes in a client situation. Sometimes our volunteers are with somebody so long that, you used to be able to transport her because she was independent, and now she needs help physically to be able to go, and so you can't do those same services you used to. So knowing that things change, knowing that things may change, can change, um, do what you can, follow the guidelines as best that you can. We're all human and we're going to have those attachments. We do it as workers as well. Um, I have a client who just passed away last week. Um, I hadn't talked to her in a while. It was very sad. Um, that's the reality of the business. Um, so care, but be sure to take care of yourself and help us not to set up expectations that are going to cause a client to fail should your relationship change with them.
And Janine, I think Chuck has his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, Janine. I was late joining our discussion, bringing back a neighbor who may become a volunteer solutions client after APS worker assesses her. Anyway, two things come to mind. Christy will remember this. About a year ago, I had a client that I would drive to food pantry. I would go to get one, bring back food. Other one, we'd go to Western Fairfax Community Ministries, Christian Ministries, and get food with him. I felt a friendship with him. We shoot the breeze. We talk about music, developments. There came a time when he asked to loan him money to buy beer. And I wouldn't do that. So from there, he was less talkative. The next couple times I took him to the food pantry, and then he asked again. I maintained, no, I can't loan you money to buy beer. Well, he was quite upset. And what added to that is that in the drive up to Western Fairfax Community Ministries, I missed a turn. And he insisted that I take the correct turn. When I didn't, he was angry. Soon he fired me. And I realized I felt bad. I called him back, left a message on his phone saying, how about we talk? Tell me some more. He didn't. And eventually he did connect with the phone call and said, no, it wasn't because you wouldn't buy beer. I just didn't want your services anymore. I didn't like it. And Christy later informed me that he cut all services with Volunteer Solutions, not just me. So I needed time to process my own feelings. One, about being terminated, and two, about no longer having him as an occasional male friend.
Thanks for sharing that. Our clients do, in some capacity, become our friends, and it's hard all the way around. We understand those feelings. I have a similar situation with someone that we helped through a Helping Hands project, which is something we do in May of each year for those that may not be familiar with it. And it's often a couple people or a group of people that go into a home and do kind of a targeted approach to meeting whatever the need is. And somehow we had thrown out this woman's deceased husband's leather jacket, or donated. I'm sure it was donated, not thrown out. And the two volunteers that were helping to sort clothes clearly said to her, are you okay donating this? And it was yes. But then 6 months later, she came back and said, where's my husband's jacket? And she has done the same kind of thing. She wants nothing to do with Volunteer Solutions. Things happen, things change. Maybe there's a trigger for her husband's death that came up. And we can't be responsible for that. We do have very clear guidelines about things like our Helping Hands projects, and we do not remove things from people's homes without their permission to do so. And that's why we often have a team approach for that, so that there's two people remembering what happened with that jacket versus one. But this client is adamant that she didn't give anybody permission to do that. So Chuck, thanks for sharing your story. Again, people have the right to make decisions. We do the best that we can. Certainly our volunteers are essential in helping us meet client needs, because our social workers couldn't do what you guys do for all their clients. It just wouldn't be possible. So know that your service is valuable, that it's greatly appreciated, that it really makes a difference in people's lives. Sometimes things work out and sometimes they don't.
And Janine, Chuck has his hand up again.
Okay, go right ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, me again. I'm glad he mentioned that part about clients having the right it occurred to me, well, this man who fired me was using his power. He
Yes.
certainly, as he aged and became dealing with more physical limitations, felt less power. But he did have the power, one, to end services with me, and then to end anything with volunteer solutions. Hopefully, his adult services worker was able to maintain a relationship and suggest how to meet his needs. If not,
Yeah.
well, that was his prerogative. The other part I wanted to mention was I've served almost 3 years at the Sully Senior Center as a general assistant. And I really value that twice a week. And I appreciate being valued there by the participants and the staff. I've realized now that sometimes when the participants aren't there anymore, that may be it. And some die and we know about it. Some we don't know what happened to them. A long time later, we learn that they've died or they're not able to meet the requirements for taking part in the senior center. And so that I've just now I understand that's part of the territory of serving adult participants at the senior center, especially older ones. It's always so good. I appreciated that our director of the senior center, who said that Melvin has been a participant for a long time. He died this weekend. And I quickly was putting up on the bulletin board several photos that I had of Melvin. And then Candace took a photo from me and walked around the entire senior center
Oh,
so people could see close up Melvin's picture and make the connection who he was. And that, I think, was part of her own processing,
mhm.
and that for others as well.
Thank you again for sharing and for mentioning senior centers. Another thing we talk about and where lots of our opportunities lie that you read about in your weekly emails is senior centers and adult day healthcare centers. There's also a virtual senior center. So if you've got someone who's homebound, couldn't get out because of the snow and ice, let's be sure and remember that that's an option for them, something that they could sign on to through their TV, a way for them to stay connected. This is all about connections, right? This is about connections between us and our neighbors. This is about connections between us and people in the community. And sometimes we might know a face but not know a name. So I think sharing that picture was wonderful. Um, we might know someone in passing, but not really remember the time or place that we know them from, right? Is it the senior center? Do they shop at the same grocery store? Is there some other connection? All of that is important.
The
Well,
And
60 or
oh, go
so
ahead, Chuck.
participants at Sully, I'm so sorry,
you're okay.
they sit by language and culture. And
Mhm.
so this man was an older African American man, and he and other participants who had different languages and original first country, they didn't interact. It's
Yeah.
just a lack of awareness. It wasn't a lack of care. So at first I thought, what could I do in terms of um, kind listening, rephrasing, suggested, what could I do to encourage interaction between the different language groups? And I've decided later, I don't need to. If it happens in one of the group exercises, one of the events, fine. Otherwise, I just get around individually, see if there's someone who looks like they could use a listening ear, no matter their first language or their culture, and focus on them.
Perfect. Emily?
Um, Thank you, Chuck, for sharing that. I actually had the pleasure of going out to the Sully Center for a scam and fraud event that was there last month and observed the um, amount of people who attend that center, which is really amazing. And then it did seem like people were interacting between groups, which I thought was great the day that I was there. But that's nice that you're working to try to bring people together and finding when you can, benefiting those that need an ear to listen. There is something in the chat, Janine. I think Marie put, if our clients raise unreasonable requirements, how could we best respond in person in a respectful and unharmed manner? And also, Chuck is right. In most cases, I'm afraid we have to take into consideration the cultural, religious, and language background of our clients. Please help me clarify this if I am wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that's exactly what we need to do. Remember that we're all individuals and interact in different ways and have different priorities and different values. I think for the client who's asking something inappropriate, um, simply saying again, that wouldn't fall within something that I could do for you. We have our guidelines. It's okay to say what you're requesting isn't comfortable to me if it's kind of a personal thing. That wouldn't be appropriate. Again, you're welcome to talk to your worker about those things that might be appropriate to interact with. Um, I'm trying to think of a situation. Well, I think that's good. Other comments on that?
I would just say, if you are asked and feel uncomfortable, bringing that to your volunteer coordinators, attention, and they might be able to support you. And in very rare instances, we have kind of intervened and worked with the caseworker, the client, and the regional volunteer coordinator, and sometimes even myself, to have a meeting with the client to get them to understand a boundary or a parameter. Generally, that's not the case, but sometimes it takes a meeting like that to kind of reset boundaries so that we can continue services. So that's kind of like the very extreme side of how we might help to address something where someone's asking something unreasonable, or if they're maybe not taking into account the volunteer and being respectful of people's time, or by asking or always asking things that are above and beyond what the volunteer can do. Those are times when we might kind of get in and talk with that client specifically. I hope that
And
helps you.
sometimes the relationship works out well for a long time and then something changes. And it's kind of an immediate thing that all of a sudden something's inappropriate. And there are times when we end a relationship between a volunteer and a client because it's no longer appropriate. We may get specific about what volunteers to match with a particular client. There are all kinds of situations, again, that change in the life of our volunteer and client matches in the service. So it's always okay to say no when we call and ask something of you. That you can set those boundaries with us as well, and you normally say that in orientation. I sent out an email to everybody in like the 22309 zip codes this week because I had someone who really needed grocery shopping on a regular basis, and the weekly emails hadn't worked. And so I had a lot of people respond and say, can't do it. That's great. It's so good to hear from you. A couple said, yes, I think I can, and we're working that out. But set your expectations and guidelines with us. When those change, let us know. Know that we're here to support you and whatever you're doing. We want to be a sounding board for you. And that goes all the way up to Emily as our supervisor. So we are here to help you, to encourage you to be successful in what you're doing. You make a huge difference, and that's important to us as well. And sometimes when maybe even you're getting too close to a client, it may be time to say, hey, I think I want to look for another opportunity. I do encourage my volunteers to terminate with clients when they need to. I help do that a lot with them, either by phone or different conversations. And we can always look for additional volunteers if that needs to happen. So thank you so much for joining us. If you think of other questions that you have, let us know. Feel free to send those in an email at any time to us. Again, we appreciate you greatly.
And Janine, can I just, Marie had said, I hope our goodwill is nicely paid off, but I see now it is okay to say no. And no is an important boundary. And so I hope you feel empowered to do that, as the clients also are empowered to say no. And then I wanted to say Tanya has her hand up also.
I just also wanted to say, depending on what the request is from the client, you can also just put it back on being a Fairfax County volunteer and just say, I'm not permitted to do that as a county volunteer. So just depending on what the situation is, just, I think Christy had mentioned this earlier as well. Just wanted to reiterate, you can also just make it as simple as that, depending on what it is.
Emily, did you want to share about these last 2 slides? And then I think we're done.
Sure. Just wanted to make sure everybody's aware there are caregiver support virtual sessions, and there are 2 that are coming up. One on February 18th, when it's time for hospice care, what caregivers need to know. And then on March 18th, there's a session that's going to focus on investment fraud for caregivers. And so I just wanted you to know those. And then also volunteer solutions. We have our connection corner for March is to be determined. We're working on it. And then we do have a save the date for our volunteer recognition. It'll be the week of April 20th, and we'll get more details out about that soon. Did want to mention that Chuck's comment about grief, that is a session that we are looking at developing, because we know that our volunteers sometimes do lose clients, and so and things change, and there's grief in all of that, and so we are looking at trying to build out a connection corner that'll be on that topic sometime soon. But those were just the things we wanted to make sure that you all knew were coming up, and we'll be emailing out information when that's ready. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you. All right. Again, let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all you do.